Hey there, and welcome to the Cyber Resilience Brief, a Safe Breach podcast. The podcast that's all about helping you build real world cyber resilience. I'm Tova Devorin, and every episode we unpack what's working, what's evolving, and what you can actually do to stay one step ahead of attackers. Today's episode, we're going to discuss NIS2, or the Network and Information Systems Directive 2, which is a European Union law focused on enhancing cybersecurity across the EU. NIS2 connects back to our previous episode on DORA, so if you have not listened to that one yet, go back and listen to it first. Or take a deep dive with us. Today's guest speaker is Adrienne Cully, Senior Sales Engineer at Safe Breach. Adrienne is also our resident expert on all things EU and UK. Let's go. Okay, let's talk about NIS2.
Hi, Tova. Thanks for this opportunity. The European Union, we've talked previously about the Digital Operations Resilience Act, DORA. Quietly just before DORA, a equally important directive came into force, which is the European Network Information Security 2 Directive, colloquially referred to as NIS2. This came into force on Thursday, the 17th of October 2024. It directly applies to the appropriate regulated industries in the EU, but also, just to stress, same as DORA, many regulated industries outside of the EU will also need to be compliant with its requirements. You can view NIS2 as being a bridge that's going to connect DORA to the forthcoming 11th of December 2026 Cyber Resilience Act, the directive coming into force. And what NIS2 does is we're aware DORA's finance, insurance and banking financial entities. NIS2 does a very interesting thing. It legally defines and differentiates between essential entities and important entities. Now, essential entities are transport, banking, financial markets, health, public administration, digital infrastructure, energy, drinking water, space, as in space travel, satellites, wastewater. Really interesting. Important entities, digital providers, manufacturing, production and distribution of chemicals, research, food production, processing and distribution, postal and courier services, manufacturing per se, and waste management. Now, those important entities are newly added, and the public administration, space and wastewater are newly added. The
Question.
initial
I mean, just for my own edification, two questions here. One, just to double check, is NIS2 only applying inside the UK or is it throughout the EU? And the second is, who determines what's important and what's essential here?
So, great questions, Tova. The NIS2 applies across the European Union. So it's all EU countries, and it's fully enacted in law in every EU country now. And it applies to all countries outside of the EU if they're trading with the regulated sectors that we just mentioned. So its scope is actually very wide, nowhere near as wide as the Cyber Resilience Act is going to be, but still very substantial. It also, just like GDPR, just like DORA, it institutes very substantial penalties. Administrative fines of up to 10 million euros, or at least 2% of the total annual worldwide turnover in the previous fiscal year of the company, whether you're in the EU or not, for essential entities. For an important entity that falls foul of NIS2, fines of up to 7 million, or at least 1.4% of the total annual worldwide turnover. This should be getting the attention, myopic, focused attention of shareholders, audit committees, boards, and C-suites, cyber resilience officers, CISOs, chief revenue officers, CEOs. Significant penalties here. But it's not just about avoiding the penalty. That's the route to tick box compliance. It's about embracing what does the Act require and how can we help. And it actually has an emphasis on proactive risk management, effective security controls, robust incident response, supply chain security. We're seeing over the last 10 years, more and more threat actors are undertaking what we refer to as supply chain attacks. It becomes very difficult when they want to compromise you, but they compromise you by compromising initially a third party that you deal with. The Log4j attack is a very, very good example of that most people are familiar with. It requires continuous improvement, and of course, this aligns perfectly with the capabilities and benefits of breach and attack simulation. Those entities and organizations subject to NIS2 will undoubtedly find that incorporating bars into their security programs is a valuable and effective way to meet the directive's requirements, enhancing their overall cyber resilience, and ultimately, which is what really matters, protecting their critical assets and services. It's the attacks on the Co-op in the UK and Marks and Spencers and Christian Dior very recently, hit in a very high-profile way. They'll be highly focused on protecting your critical assets and services really matters. That's why we should be adhering with DORA, adhering to NIS2. That you've got a choice. The Co-op, for example, and Marks and Spencers, their CEOs both, I don't know if it happened at Christian Dior, but both their CEOs were contacted directly by the threat actor and found themselves in a conversation with a hostile threat actor. I would suggest the C-suites, they now have a simple choice. You can wait passively for that to happen, and it's not going to be a pleasant or comfortable experience, or you can have a conversation with a breach and attack simulation platform company, such as ourselves, and avoid that happening. So, your choice. Who would you choose to be in conversation with? Safe breach or a hostile threat actor? And
I think I know who I'd choose. But then the question is, if you're going to be looking at someone like Safe Breach, of course, I'm very pro Safe Breach. What kind of questions would you ask? Or is there anything specifically in this too, like the Articles of DORA, that is pointing someone towards a best solution?
very much so, Tova. There are actually key considerations defined in this too. There are 5 of them. We use breach and attack simulation to validate security control effectiveness. It's actually key consideration number 1 in this too. Couldn't be more specific. Consideration number 2 is enhancing incident response capabilities. Again, simulate and emulate. Attack yourself before anybody else does. Consideration number 3 is supporting security audits and assessments. How better can you assess yourself? Don't do a paper tick box assessment. Do a real continuous attack program that's continually probing and testing your security posture and validating your security controls. Key consideration number 4 is strengthening supply chain security. Major focus of NIS2. Why is that incorporated in NIS2? Because that's where the attackers are applying attention. Supply chain security is both difficult, attractive to attackers, but also there is a solution. Simulate attacks on your supply chain security. And then finally, facilitating continuous security improvement. If we talked before about simulation being the cyber gym, the coach, trainer, and gym facilities for the cyber prize fighter. If we think of key consideration number 5 as facilitating continuous security improvement, uh, also speaks to continuous threat exposure management. This very much wraps up all of NIS2's goals and is a very efficient and effective route to you being compliant with this directive and law.
That's very clear. So I'm curious, just doing a quick zoom out, how does this relate to DORA? We know how it relates to it conceptually, but is there a situation where there's, I don't know, mutual enforcement or there overlap? How did one come about vis-a-vis the other? I'm just curious.
So that's a great question. They overlap. They're not mutually exclusive. If you're a finance, insurance, or banking financial entity, you have to abide by both. If you're one of the entities we mentioned earlier, you have to abide by NIS2. The principles are slightly different, but the core ideas driving this are from the same legislators, the same regulators, and it'll be interesting as we get to enforcement as we go into 2026 to see whether, because nobody knows at the moment, whether we see dual enforcement of regulation when people fall foul, or whether we see regulators picking and choosing as to which is the appropriate law to enforce. Legally, not just in theory and practice, you could be hit by both sets of regulation and both sets of fines. I strongly suggest you don't want to be going there. Don't be that zero patient and don't be that guinea pig. It's very serious stuff. It's only going to get more stringent when the Cyber Resilience Act comes into force, and for the UK, the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill will become the Cyber Security and Resilience Act. But it's important for us to you mentioned, Tova, zooming out. It's important for us to unpick what's the key requirements here and how do we deliver that. And there's a huge overlap between DORA compliance, DORA applied methodology using breach and attack simulation, and NIS2 compliance and um, applied methodology using breach and attack simulation. So the good news is complying with one will take you a long way towards complying with the second. And even if you're not directly affected by NIS2, just like DORA, you should be very aware of its cybersecurity principles because they're very sound.
How are we seeing NIS2 practically right now in the market? Do we have any customers or partners approaching us with questions?
So that's a great question, Tova. We
Mm.
absolutely do. This is it's unusual for us to have a client engagement, a prospect interaction where DORA isn't front and center. It's also becoming much more unusual for NIS2 not to be part of the discussion. And that's not just EU based. It's becoming much more active conversation in the United States, in Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Japan. The impact of these regulations, it truly is global. It's redefining the regulatory landscape. And the reason the impact is so significant is the core cybersecurity principles that underpin both DORA and NIS2. So for example, NIS2 also has direct implications on all EU data centers. It expands both the scope and the depth of cybersecurity obligations across critical national infrastructure. By way of example, by the way, in October last year, in the King's speech in the UK, King Charles III, in introducing the UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, quietly slipped in, and the King's speech, for those who aren't familiar in the UK, represents the government's plan for business for the next 12 months. It's delivered by the King, but it's effectively the government's agenda. It was quietly slipped in there that all UK data centres are now critical national infrastructure, critical digital infrastructure. NIS 2 brings in the same requirement. So what does that actually mean? Well, NIS 2 widens its net to include data centre operators with critical services such as cloud computing, co-location, internet exchange points, domain name services, and it includes both large and medium-sized organisations in both the essential and the important sectors, which we've discussed before. That's basically those that have more than 50 employees or over 10 million euros a year annual turnover. There are some very specific requirements in terms of governance. It introduces executive accountability for cybersecurity to the C-suite. In risk management, NIS2 introduces proactive measures including encryption, incident detection, and business continuity planning. For supply chain, which we've chatted about previously, it introduces the need to assess and manage risks from third-party vendors. How are you addressing that? I would suggest very strongly breach and attack simulation should be a key part of that strategy. For incident response, it requires detailed response plans and resilience protocol. And the tip of the spear of resilience is breach and attack simulation, adversary emulation, and continuous threat exposure management. For training, it requires regular cybersecurity training for all staff. Now, that's not just phishing emails and telling people to change the password. That's also regular cybersecurity training for your most highly trained technical staff, regular cybersecurity training for your red team, for your blue team, for your purple team, for any penetration testing that you have, for any teams that are running breach and attack simulation. How are you delivering that regular training? The Act also brings in faster and stricter incident reporting. For the affected legal entities, cyber incidents must be reported within 24 hours. A more detailed follow-up report is due within 72 hours and a final report within 1 month. I strongly suggest that a key part of that reporting is having simulated and emulated the exact attack and been able to comment on why the live attack was successful, what gaps you had, and how you've remediated them. National authorities can also audit and penalise non-compliance in reporting. Very, very important. This will be proactively audited and penalised. The
I do come from compliance, and I was wondering about this when you mentioned the audit. Does that mean that there will be a need for both internal audits and external audits?
for a great question. For companies that are publicly listed, absolutely. Privately held companies don't have to do external audit in terms of a external auditor, but they will be subject to external audit by regulators. So it introduces the concept of both internal audit and external audit to the whole spectrum of business and government, whether you're publicly listed, whether you're privately held, or whether you're government. So really important points there, Tova. And why not be on the front foot with this? Be proactive, know where you are. Also, if you're running regular testing, if you have, unfortunately, a live breach, you're going to have far better information to report to the regulator about where you are on this particular threat actor, this particular attack, these particular assets. Be on the front foot. The Act also requires that every EU country designates a national competent authority for enforcement. It requires that the EU states liaise via the European Cyber Crises Liaison Organisation Network, EU Cyclone, that you may not be familiar with, a brand new entity, and NIS2, the EU Cybersecurity Agency. What does this mean overall? Well, unfortunately, it means increased compliance costs, especially for the smaller operators. It means, though, that third parties are going to be looking for you to confirm, are you achieving NIS2 compliance? There's a real advantage in business to that. It requires cybersecurity to be integrated into your business strategy. For 40 years, cybersecurity sadly has been viewed as magic fairy dust that boards and shareholders could sprinkle over their business, and that's never worked and never been good enough. Here's the key to success and sanity in terms of both DORA and NIS2 if you're a C-suite employee. You should view cybersecurity as a golden thread to weave through your business, not magic fairy dust to be sprinkled on top. Aim for the golden thread. And the golden thread, the needle you want to weave through your business, is breach and attack simulation. That's how we achieve this. Going to be a very interesting year ahead.
The Cyber Resilience Brief is a Safe Breach podcast. It's produced by Tova Devorin and executive produced by Adrian Cully. Sound design provided by Adobe Podcasts. Distribution provided by Podbean, and extra support and love from the Safe Breach team. For more information on how adversarial exposure validation through Safe Breach can protect you and your business, no matter where you reside or what industry you're in, please visit us at www.safebreach.com.